At the same time, we are tracking global public opinion. There have been massive protests all across the world. We can show you some video from that. Here you can see in London, right in the middle of the UK. This is in Cairo. Here we have New York City. We have continuing in Glasgow and Scotland. We have Amman, Jordan. The Jordanian one in particular was massive. This is in Lahore, in Pakistan, Dublin, in Ireland. These have been put together by Al Jazeera. Cape Town, South Africa, where their president also voiced support. Baghdad in Iraq. Naples in Italy. The point that we're trying to put together here, Krystal, is that yes, we've seen massive pro-Israel protests, of course, here in the United States, but a major highlight from these is cities with large Islamic populations, and then also Islamic and Arab countries themselves is seeing a huge outpouring of protests for the Palestinian cause. The reason, again, that this connects to our geopolitics segment that we did earlier is about dragging the U.S. Possibly further into the conflict, mobilizing much of the world against us if we do not finesse our policy here very, very carefully. It also comes at a time when Western governments are really beginning to crack down on dissent in their own countries. We can put this up there on the screen. We have a bit of a mashup here. For example, from The Independent, flying a Palestinian flag in the UK, quote, may not be legitimate, according to their Home Secretary. In France, they have ordered a ban on all pro-Palestinian protests from the Interior Minister themselves in order to, quote, clamp down on anti-Semitism. From Haaretz, the Likud minister has formulated an emergency regulation to imprison citizens who, quote, harm national morale. This is inside of Israel, to be clear. That's like alien and sedition level stuff.
Crazy.
And then even here, I gotta say, not too happy about this one. Senator Josh Hawley calling for the DOJ to investigate student-led pro-Palestinian groups on college campuses.
What happened to that whole weaponization of government concern there, Mr. Hawley?
I would personally like to keep our FBI out of student groups. Didn't go so well the last time that happened, even if, you know, any group in particular. And finally, in terms of social media, it has been such a nightmare for our team sifting what is true, what is not, to try and frame everything and make sure and be like, hey, this is from Al Jazeera, so it's got a pro-Palestinian bias. Hey, this is from BBC or whatever, from the West, so it's got this type of bias. But the problem is that we are seeing mass censorship now applied on social media. We can put this up there, for example, on the screen from Meta, aka Facebook, suspending the page of, quote, the Quds News Network. That's a Palestinian news organization that, to be clear, is affiliated with Hamas. I'm not, you know, defending their affiliation or any of that, but I do think it is important, as always, I spoke up for RT and I'll speak up for it now, is I want to know what these people are saying. You know, it was a very important moment, Krystal, when we played here on the show, that translated segment from a Hamas leader being like, hey, we're going to slaughter people if we don't see, if we have airstrikes that continue. It's important to hear what the quote unquote enemy or what the other side is saying, just to be like, okay, this is what they're telling people. In terms of their internal communications, it's actually vital to be able to see and to hear. And we can always, I think all of us are smart enough to take things with a grain of salt and to sit here and to actually try and look at things in context. And so to see the banning of this massive Facebook page, which was like a center for sharing information, I understand why people are like, oh, but we have to crack down on it. But at the end of the day, less information just means we're more in the dark. And that's more that we have to rely on, you know, somebody else's translation or somebody else's view of what's happening with this and this. I really would venture to say not a single person on earth is going to be like pro-Israel and see a Quds News Network thing shared to their page and be like, you know what? Nope, now I'm Palestinian. But that's not how the world works.
Well, it's especially critical in a situation like this when, I mean, there are very few journalists allowed into Gaza. I mean, in terms of getting actual information, video, footage, etc., from the ground, it is really important to have as many sources as we possibly can. And, you know, this is something we stood up for RT when they were getting banned all over the place. Not that we have any love for them. They're not full of propaganda and all that stuff as well. So it's, you know, about applying a consistent principle here. And this is far from the first time that Facebook/Meta has worked directly with the Israeli government, who told them you need to censor or take down this and that and the other group in a similar fashion that they, you know, have also worked with the United States government, I'm sure other governments around the world. I just want to give you a sense of how wild and insane and heavy-handed some of this censorship has become. I mean, on its face, banning protests in France, also in Germany. And this is not, we're just going to ban, like, if you're pro-Hamas. No, any sympathy with the Palestinian cause, that protest completely banned. That is wild. This proposed regulation within Israel, which there's a lot of talk about, oh, Israel, the, Middle Eastern's democracy, et cetera, which, the Palestinians who live in Israel may beg to differ. But what is being suggested here is that these regulations would allow the communications minister directly to tell police to arrest civilians, remove them from their homes, or seize their property if he personally believes that they have spread information that could, quote, harm national morale or serve as the basis for enemy propaganda. This was drafted in consultation with National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is one of, if not the most extreme member of Netanyahu's cabinet. It would apply to the general public and the media, as well as both local and foreign media. Will also apply to the publication of factually correct statements at the minister's discretion. So it is the most dystopian, Big Brother, nightmarish thing you can possibly imagine that is being proposed here. And, Saagar, this issue has always, even when emotions and tensions are not as high as they are right now, this issue and how you talk about Israel and Palestine, I would argue, has always been the most central locus of, quote unquote, cancel culture, especially when you consider explicit laws against supporting BDS, which have been enacted in a lot of states across the country. When you see the number of jobs that have been lost, columnists who have lost their jobs, university positions which have been canceled, et cetera. And we're about to get into this. When you see the reaction to that statement, which I objected to, that Harvard student groups put out, but it's not just, hey, let's, call it out and say we disagree. It's we want to know who they are. We want to dox them. We want to blacklist them for literally their entire lives. That is the reaction to saying the quote-unquote wrong thing on this issue.
Yeah, look, I know a lot of people who are pro-Israel, who are getting caught up in the moment and who otherwise would not be for or would oppose much of that type of action that is happening here because they could also recognize that it would be very easily used against them on a whole host of other issues that they care about. Now, if you care about this the most and trying to crack down on this at the time, but then you just have to admit that you're really not for principles. And that's the issue, is we watched this happen with Russia. Remember, at that, in the invasion of Ukraine, we had, the Russian tennis players that weren't allowed at Wimbledon. We had, the banning of Russia. There's actually a restaurant near where I live, which is a Russian Uzbek cuisine. They took the word Russian off their sign.
Wow.
But, here in Washington, there was a famous restaurant, Russia House, which I think either took its sign down or something like that, which used to, again, serve Russian food and drinks and all those things. And now I don't believe it, advertises because they were facing vandalism. This level of insanity reminds me very much of the post 9/11 period. And
exactly.
What do we all look back on freedom fries as? Fucking stupid. Let's all be honest. We're I cannot believe that this country ever backed the freedom fries thing.
And that was the least of it.
Right?
Think of the national security state. Think of the Patriot Act. Yeah. Think of the surveillance of citizens that was justified by, the horrific acts, terror attacks of 9/11. Think of what that allowed, the power that allowed politicians to grab in the name of national security. Think of the way that the FBI was used to, rather than actually fighting crime and keeping people safe, to entrap young Muslim men so that they could have some big press conference and some big sting and disrupt a terrorist attack that was never going to happen if they weren't radicalizing people and buying them guns and giving them money and convincing them that they should conduct a terror attack. So do not underestimate the insanity that can come with this type of justifiable upset and emotion and desire for people to stay safe. And we are seeing it spread like wildfire around the globe.
Just look, don't get caught up in the hysteria. In just this short amount of time you and I have been doing this show, Just this show, Breaking Points, we've lived through 3 major conflicts: Afghanistan, Ukraine, and now Israel and Hamas. And we see a consistent period every time. Both of our beliefs are very much rooted in the insanity of the post 9/11 world. And anything that reminds me of that, I start to get very, very skeptical. I think it will generally serve you well to keep that skepticism, especially when we're in the heat of things. And 6 months or 7 months before, you can look back, or 6 or 7 months later, you can look back and be like, yeah, that was pretty silly. So just try and avoid being that person.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.